temperance is not a matter of effort. It's a matter of traction. So what temperance does is it makes it easy to have cravings and not give in to them. So I think that the real danger of the self-control paradigm is people try to control their cravings. They try to control, and they berate themselves for having the cravings. They feel bad about themselves for having certain cravings.
Hey, this is Sharif here with Dr. Kevin Majors for another episode of Golden Hour. Kevin, good to be here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, great to be back.
Kevin, I thought we could continue our series on ideals. Last week, we discussed humility, which is a great place to start. It's kind of the foundation. And this week, I thought we could continue by discussing the ideal of temperance. How's that sound?
Sounds great to me.
Okay, well, maybe we could just start with, a quick definition of what temperance is. Maybe many of our listeners already know what it is, but I think it always just helps to ground the discussion. So I don't know if you want to offer one to get us started.
Yeah, I would think that temperance is the ability to act according to your ideals, no matter what desires or cravings you may have.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of mastery over one's own desires.
Yeah, mastery of your behavior in the face of your desires.
Okay.
So that the behavior is what you're actually mastering and shaping. So, and that's a really important idea because temperance is the same thing in some ways as self-control. And the key to self-control is, what are you trying to control? What does it mean to control yourself? In this context, it only means your behavior. It doesn't mean your thoughts and feelings. So and I think what happens is people feel out of control sometimes because they're wishing they could have different impulses and cravings, but they just don't. They keep going along with them. So the more you give into them, the more out of control you feel. And they feel like their ability to control their cravings is nil. And so they say they have no self-control. But the problem there is that they're trying to control their cravings. And there has to be another way of overcoming them. But I originally actually developed a website called overcomingcravings.com. And then eventually optimal work in some ways I see as version 2.0 of that effort. Because everything that was originally taught in Overcoming Cravings is really now, I think, brought to its highest development in optimal work.
That's awesome. Okay, Kevin, so just to drill on this, so temperance kind of the complement to courage, where courage, you would maybe say, is the ability to control your behaviors in the face of fear, as opposed to temperance, which is controlling your behaviors in the face of desires, fear and desires being basically opposites. And so in the case of fear, that your approach to anxiety is teaching people how to reframe, be mindful of the fear, and then challenge themselves to act kind of contrary to what the fear suggests. So reframing mindfulness challenge is how to approach anxiety. So is there a similar dynamic there with temperance, with overcoming desire, that reframing mindfulness challenge, or do all of those things have opposites, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reframe is always going to be, how can this challenge bring out the best in me? And when it comes to something that is potentially dangerous, but that is the right thing to do, then that's where you need courage. So like going into battle, for instance. When it comes to things that you desire, the goal there, is to maintain your behavior according to your ideals, which is like saying, like, what would a prudent person do here? Like, what would be the best way of responding here? How do I want to be living in the face of this craving? So the reframe is actually the same. It's kind of, you're still looking to see what's the best way of thriving in this setting. Just in this case, the setting is a craving instead of a fear. The mindfulness is the same, because really you feel these things in the same place, which is the chest. That it's funny to, to people, when you ask them when you're craving something, where do you crave it? It's interesting. People, when they have the experience of cravings, they think of it as a kind of like an all or nothing fact that envelops their whole person. And I'm either craving this or I'm not craving it. But to think of it as something discrete, something almost tangible, really changes the nature of it. And it makes the craving seem very different. So I always want people to rate a craving when they have it and to get good at rating cravings on a scale of 0 to 10. How strong is it? And in my practice, I'll ask people, like, so what is your favorite drink? And someone says, oh, Coca-Cola, that's my favorite. And I ask them, just think then right now, what would it be like if I had a can of Coke right in front of me? Could you experience the craving for it right now? And if it's their favorite drink, they can. And then I ask them on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you crave it? And they can rate it. And where in your body do you feel it? And they feel it in the chest as a kind of tension. It's different in some ways than the tension you feel with anxiety, but it's also very similar. And so it has a different kind of color to it or something, like it has a different emotional hue, but it's still there. And as they feel it, it goes away. And then you have them imagine, the Coke coming closer or the crack of the can as you open it, and it'll come back. And then they can focus again on the sensation of the craving, and it goes away. What's interesting is that you can do these successive little exposures, even just imaginally, by having them imagine their favorite food or whatever it might be. And they do experience the craving. So the mindfulness part is the same. Now, the challenge part is the same too. It's leaning into the challenge. But when it comes to fearful things, leaning in means leaning into the approach. But with cravings, it means leaving into the avoidance. So putting some distance between yourself. So I think that you don't want to give yourself a mixed signal. That's why you have to be careful if you're talking about doing craving exposures. Because the very fact of approaching your favorite food, let's say, well, that is giving a mixed signal. It's like telling a whole bunch of your predictive circuits, I'm about to do this thing. I'm about to enjoy this thing. So I usually tell people when it comes to cravings, like just treat them, deal with them when they come up naturally, when they're just kind of natively triggered. That's the easiest, because then you're not having to manufacture the approach. It's just there. And then you can just use your attentional skills to attend to the feeling of it. Mm-hmm. Is that clear that there is a difference? Everything is in some way flipped, but it's still the same.
Yeah, especially the challenge step. There's a flip. It's the valence of that is flipped. It seems like with temperance, the occasions for challenge are maybe more frequent, whereas fear, I don't know with how often like someone with a fear of heights has an occasion to go to an extremely tall building. It's like once a month or something. So, it's less training will occur if you just wait for the natural occasions. Let me make a quick comment on what you just said, which is I found the thing of rating 1 to 10, how much do I crave this thing? Like for when I'm working or when I'm taking a break and I feel an urge to use my phone or that type of situation, I found that's the most helpful piece of advice I ever got. Just practical thing is just great. Rate 1 through 10. How much do I want to check my phone right now? Then it's funny, as I do it, it goes down. It's like it starts at a 6, and then by the time I've kind of assessed it, it's like a 2, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm okay.
Yeah. That's great. That's great to hear. There is something about rating that makes the thing seem so almost trivial or finite that it's like, okay, well, this is totally doable. And you just stay with it a little bit longer and it goes down.
Mm-hmm. So now you mentioned earlier that temperance is about controlling your behaviors in the face of thoughts or feelings. I imagine that some people want to have really great self-mastery, and part of the vision of that, I think, would be to be able to work for long periods of time without getting distracted, or to be able to maintain interior silence for a long time without having some kind of internal thought come up or internal distraction again. So you're cautioning against that view of self-mastery or temperance as kind of a result of a process, or I mean, how would you think
as a
about that?
result, as an
Mhm.
outcome.
Yeah.
So that the goal with temperance is to live according to your ideals, to deepen your bonds, regardless of what your desires may be. So that you might really want to watch your favorite show, and you're really attached to this show, but the people you live with, or someone your partner, someone you love, really has some other goal in mind for that time. So do you prioritize, the bond, and and uh, and try to be generous there, and to let your preference for that whatever show you watch together, change, or do you get stuck on what you want? So temperance gives us freedom. And I'm not saying that people can never negotiate things with their loved ones and come up with things that they would both enjoy. And sometimes you get what you want, sometimes the other person gets what they want. But temperance gives you the freedom to make those determinations without the emotional charge, so that you can let things go. So doing a road trip with a temperate person is a delight, because the person can focus on what's mutually enjoyable, and they end up having a great time. They don't get their heart set on they have to see every little, we have to go to the historical marker I want to see, or we have to stop at this kind of thing for lunch. And when people aren't temperate, what happens is they get their heart set on like trivial, small, things, but their heart is set on them. And then they're like, this is, what I want because I want it. And that gets tiring if everyone else in their life has to go along with that. The temperate person can have preferences, is happy when others are sensitive to them, and is appreciative when others are generous with them. And I think if you never had preferences, others couldn't be generous with you. So that's not the goal. But they're also easy. They can set it aside, and they can do something else. So it's that freedom you have on the inside.
Right. So I wonder if you could give people maybe some words of encouragement here, because I think sometimes when you're in uh, when you have to resist the urge or the impulse or the craving or something, it feels difficult, and it's going to take a lot of effort, and maybe I can do it just once, but I don't know if I can resist this every single time, for the rest of my life. So is this something that gets habituated over time? I imagine it does. So is that the right way to think about it? That okay, this is a process that's going to get easier with time, or but actually, part of what you pointed out earlier is that when you start to be mindful of the impulse, it kind of goes away a little bit. It becomes easier to resist. Um, so, is that the way to think about it, or how do you give people a kind of positive encouragement that hey, they can do this?
I would say that temperance is not a matter of effort. It's a matter of traction. So what temperance does is it makes it easy to have cravings and not give in to them. So I think that the real danger of the self-control paradigm is people try to control their cravings. They try to control, and they berate themselves for having the cravings. They feel bad about themselves for having certain cravings. And maybe it's true, giving into those cravings does lead them to violate their ideals. Okay, then, I'm not saying that they should be celebrating the cravings or giving into them, but certainly they don't need to berate themselves for them. The cravings are understandable. It's just predictions for what's going to come next based on your past behavior. So being really understanding with that process means you don't like beat yourself up for having distractions or for having impulses or things. You let yourself acknowledge them and feel them and see this is just part of my training, but it's not a matter of effort. We don't want people white knuckling. That's an interesting idea. Is that temperance brings up the question of, what's your image of getting through some kind of temptation? Is it white knuckling? And I think that there we would say that is the hardest way to get through a temptation, because what you're trying to do, I think, when you're white knuckling, is push through, um, in some effortful way to force yourself to do the right thing, uh, carrying a heavy burden of the craving. And it can feel like you're going to run out of strength. if you do that. Like you're going to be depleted. In fact, there is a whole wing of psychology called ego depletion, which is one of these now happily debunked theories, that self-control, in fact, does not need to be ego depleting at all. So it has everything to do, in fact, with the people's view of the matter. Some people find it strengthening. They find the act, in some cultures, celebrate the act of standing up to cravings internally as being a huge victory and a sign of strength. And they actually feel encouraged and strengthened by it, not depleted as a result of it. Okay, so just get this idea then, what's the alternative to white knuckling? Well, temperance really is, or in its core, is deliberately accepting cravings while you commit to your ideals. It's acceptance and commitment together. So the acceptance part means that you can recognize when you're getting pulled off track, and then you can release it, and then re-anchor yourself back on where you want to be going. Okay, that's a threefold thing of recognize the wayward impulse, release it, and then return to what you're doing. That is mindfulness. Those are the 3 steps of mindfulness, where the first is detect the intrusion and then let go of it and then re-anchor yourself in something in the present moment. So you can already see that none of those steps have to involve effort. How hard is it to rate a craving on the scale of 0 to 10? That might be your way of practicing recognizing it that's really reliable. Seems to me it's no effort at all. Yeah, and then letting go of its very nature has no effort. So it's a releasing. And then attending to what you're doing at hand, or the path at hand, that also doesn't take that much effort. And there's no white knuckling in that at all. And so while you're immersed in the dynamic of a craving, it can seem like the only path out is strenuous effort, and that's white knuckling. But a much better path is to transcend the craving, get above it, be bigger than it. So you rate it, and then you let go of it and kind of insert yourself into what you were doing.
Yeah. So would you say that part of the craving is this sense that there's like a momentum or a tunnel vision that it just makes it feel easy to continue along the same path? That's my impression, is that when I want to check my phone, it feels so easy to do that. It's just that it's like going downhill or something. It's the course of least resistance, the path of least resistance. But maybe to not check it is not a whole lot of effort or a whole lot of work, or it's not that difficult, but it just somehow getting off the downhill is hard in some way.
Exactly. So that is the kind of, so yes, what happens when it's like you do get a kind of negative momentum when you're giving into a vicious cycle. And that is the nature of vicious cycles, is that they pick up speed. So if it's like, if you're going to be rollerblading, I used to rollerblade, in high school and college, and some in places in Dallas, there was just these enormous hills that it was very dangerous to rollerblade down. Of course, it's fun to try, and but you're completely out of control. You have a lot of freedom at the top as you decide to go down the hill, but once you're going down the hill, you have no more freedom to decide to go down it or not. And then anything you do could produce a crash. And this biggest hill, there's a stop sign and an intersection right at the bottom. So it was always, you're hoping that there's no cars because you couldn't stop at all. I survived all that, but that is my image in my mind of a vicious cycle, that as you're gaining momentum going down, you just don't have the freedom to change course anymore. So now you can always, when it comes to behaviors that are not mechanical like that, if it's just internal behaviors, it feels similar, but that's only an analogy. In fact, at any moment, it's like you could hover. That'd be like if you're on the rollerblades, suddenly you're lifted off the ground, and now you're hovering a bit above it. So, and you can always get there and detach from what seems like a train heading one direction, and you can instead just be aware of the train, and so you can recognize it and where it's heading. You can even measure its momentum inside, How strong does the impulse feel? Which is really just a function of, on a scale of 0 to 10, how high is the craving? The higher the craving, the more momentum it's going to feel it has. And then you can practice, feeling it in the chest, and it'll start to go down. And then you can let go of it and re-anchor yourself back on the task at hand.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin, we're almost out of time here, but in last week's episode on humility, we painted a picture of the different levels or degrees of humility. And at the top, you have this very beautiful ideal for people to be aiming for. So then I want to just finish with a two-part question. Is one, what does temperance look like at the highest level? Is it all about just resisting these impulses that are contrary to your ideals? Or what does it really look like at the top? And then the second question is, how do you get there? I mean, how do you practice the ideal? If at the lower levels it's about resisting impulses, that's pretty clear how to practice it and be growing in the ideal. Resist the impulses or transcend the impulses, maybe, as you'd say now. But then at the higher levels, what does it look like, and how do you grow in it once you've transcended temperance as resisting impulse?
Yeah. Maybe the height of temperance is the willingness to make sacrifices for love. That the people you love, you're willing to sacrifice your own preferences for them. So that willingness to sacrifice seems to me to be the essential freedom that temperance gives you, so that you have a dominion over what you get your heart set on. And you only let your heart get set on people and ideals and things that actually have meaning. You don't let your heart get set on having that phone or having that kind of house or having that kind of car or whatever it might be. Temperance gives you then the ability to be deliberately investing your whole heart into things that matter in life. So all of that, in my mind, is contained in the willingness to make sacrifices for love and things that matter. And then we grow in it anytime we can feel that kind of momentum you were describing, like the downward momentum. And whether it's like anytime we can transcend in a moment the path of least resistance that's pulling us along. So, we're, many people are just about to start, Lent, or have just started it. Looking for little things you can give up or say no to. One of the best ways of rating how powerful that practice is try to see if you can give up something that would produce a craving if you didn't have it. So try to do some kind of act of, like fasting, for instance. Now, obviously, fasting would produce it, but it could also mean that at a meal you might want the water right away, but you could delay that as well, and then see if while you're delaying it, do you have a craving for it, and then rate the craving. So having little acts like that throughout the day that you are deliberately practicing having a craving and rating it, that gives you, I think, a whole new ability to be deliberate in the face of cravings. Also, there are, just to mention here, but two other really important times where automation takes over. One is when you sit down to start a task. There's a huge automated push to just get started. So in the golden hour as a methodology, deliberately pausing before you start, hovering over the task, planning it out, and then engaging mindfully with it, that is meant to teach people temperance, so that you're having to get away from automation as you begin. And similarly, then the second one is as you end, and trying to deliberately stop on time, so that you are practicing letting go. This is what's called cognitive shifting. That's the ability to initiate a task at will, and then an ability to stop a task at will and move to the next. So as people practice starting and stopping things on time, they are very deliberately learning to have a new level of self-control. And I think that frees them up then to practice it in even more meaningful ways in the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin, I think that's a fantastic note to end on. So
All right, Sharif.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back next week.
See you then.